Fleet Commander Draz Vortex stood on the command deck of the Annihilator, his six-fingered hands clasped firmly behind his back. He gazed out at the holographic display of the small blue planet suspended in the air before him. The planet, Earth, was a mere speck against the backdrop of the vast expanse of space. His polished exoskeleton gleamed under the ambient lighting. The ceremonial conquest medals hanging from his chest clinked softly as he inhaled through his primary respiratory slits. A faint chuckle escaped his mandibles as he surveyed the planet. 10,000 ships, Draz said with a gravelly laugh, his voice thick with amusement. For this? Supreme Command must be joking. He turned to his senior tactical officer, Len Quaven, who had approached with a slight bow, his antennae flicking nervously. Commander, the Conquest Fleet is in formation and awaiting your orders. All systems report battle-ready status. Battle-ready? Draz repeated, his laughter echoing through the deck. As if we'll need to battle anything. We've conquered 37 civilizations, Quaven. This primitive mudball doesn't stand a chance. The bridge crew joined in the laughter, their voices filled with arrogance. The Galatan Empire, the mightiest empire in the galaxy, had dominated the stars for millennia. Their neutrino compression drives made interstellar travel as simple as crossing a room. Their quantum phase weaponry could reduce entire continents to glass in mere moments, and their neural networks could process the sum total of most species' knowledge in microseconds. And now, they were here, preparing to conquer a species that hadn't even managed to colonize its own solar system. The idea of it seemed almost laughable to Draz and his crew. Commander, the voice of Pac Zendel, the communications director, interrupted, cutting through the laughter. The Supreme Overmind has requested a direct communication link. Draz's posture straightened immediately, but his mood soured. Patch it through to my private chamber, he ordered, his irritation evident. As he made his way to the communication chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission, this task, was beneath the attention of the Supreme Overmind. Why would the leader of the entire Galatan Empire be personally monitoring the invasion of such a lowly species? This was hardly worth the time of a junior administrator, let alone the Supreme Overmind himself. The communication chamber hummed to life as Draz entered, the air shimmering with a soft glow. In an instant, the imposing figure of Supreme Overmind Krell materialized before him, a towering figure of evolved Galatan perfection. Krell's translucent form loomed over Draz, neural tendrils swaying like underwater vegetation, moving with eerie grace. Commander Vortex! The Overmind's voice reverberated, deep and commanding, echoing throughout the chamber. Our intelligence suggests you may be underestimating the task before you. Draz smirked, unable to hide his disdain. With all due respect, Supreme One, he said, I've conquered worlds with civilizations far more advanced than this one. These humans haven't even developed basic telepathic abilities. They communicate by pushing air through meat flaps in their faces. It's primitive beyond words. Krell's neural tendrils pulsed with warning colors, but Draz simply waved dismissively. Need I remind you of the Arcosian rebellion? Krell's voice dropped to a dangerous octave. They too seemed primitive, until they weren't. Draz chuckled, a dismissive sound that echoed in the chamber. A fluke. The Arcosians were hiding technology. These humans hide nothing. We've been monitoring their global information network for decades. They broadcast their weaknesses for anyone to see. They fight among themselves over imaginary lines on their planet's surface. They poison their own water supplies for profit. Half of them don't even believe in basic scientific principles. The Overmind's voice softened, a note of warning in its words. You will follow standard conquest protocols. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Full deployment. 10,000 ships seems excessive for a backwater planet, but I trust your judgment. Draz's mandibles clicked with irritation. Yes, Supreme One. Your will shall be done, he said through clenched teeth. As the hologram of the Overmind began to dissipate, Draz took a deep breath, trying to push his frustration aside. He had no doubts about the outcome of this invasion. The humans would surrender within hours. He would prove the Overmind wrong. Returning to the bridge, Draz addressed his crew with renewed confidence. Why are you all standing around like newly hatched globworms? He barked. Initiate the final jump sequence. It's time to add another primitive species to our glorious empire. The fleet's final faster-than-light jump to Earth was imminent. Draz settled into his command throne, his mind already calculating the swift victory that awaited. He had conquered dozens of worlds, each one more advanced than the last. This would be no different. The humans would fold within hours of their arrival. But as the fleet prepared for the jump, a strange feeling nagged at the back of Draz's mind. He shrugged it off. After all, what threat could a species so far behind technologically pose to the might of the Galatan Empire? The Galatan fleet, a colossal force of 10,000 ships, emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, surrounding Earth with intimidating precision. Draz Vortex, sitting in the command throne of the Annihilator, couldn't help but feel the thrill of impending conquest. He looked out at the holographic display of the planet. Earth. It was a small, insignificant world, practically begging to be conquered. The fleet's sensors confirmed what Draz had already assumed. No space-based defenses, no orbital platforms, no military grid. Earth's technologies were primitive, lacking the advanced weaponry that would pose any threat to his fleet. A planet still bound to fossil fuels, divided among warring nations, a species far from the level of civilization that could challenge the mighty Galatan Empire. As the ships prepared for their next move, Draz leaned back in his chair, letting out a deep chuckle. What a surprise, he muttered, barely hiding his amusement. This will be easier than I thought. These humans are still fighting among themselves over imaginary lines on their planet's surface. They poison their own water supplies for profit and haven't even mastered basic space travel. What could they possibly do to stop us? His tactical officer, Quaven, approached with an update. The Conquest fleet is in formation, and all systems report battle-ready status, Commander. Draz waved his hand dismissively, enjoying the simple pleasure of knowing victory was inevitable. Battle-ready? For what? This is a slaughter waiting to happen. The command bridge was filled with the laughter of the crew, their arrogance clear as they shared in Draz's certainty. The Galatan Empire, after all, had conquered 37 civilizations across 3 galactic arms. Their neutrino compression drives had made interstellar travel as simple as crossing a room. Their quantum phase weaponry could turn entire continents into glass in the blink of an eye. The Galatans had never failed. It was only a matter of time before Earth would fall to their superior technology. Draz, enjoying his moment, turned to Pac Zendel, the communications director, and ordered the broadcast of their standard surrender demand. Send them the usual ultimatum, he said. Give them 1 planetary rotation to respond. Then we begin the invasion. He sat back, confident that the humans would bow before them, unwilling to even put up a fight. This was the easiest mission of his career. Zendel hesitated for a moment, her tendrils flickering nervously. Commander, she began, standard protocol for first contact suggests we should... Draz cut her off, irritated by the interruption. This isn't first contact. We've been monitoring them for decades. We know everything about them. Just send the demand. He waved his hand dismissively, silencing her. The communication was sent, and the fleet waited for Earth's inevitable surrender. As the transmission was broadcast, Draz turned his attention to Science Officer Brix, who had been quietly studying the human records. "While we wait for their capitulation," Draz said with a smug grin, "give me something interesting about these humans. Anything that might make this conquest less tedious." Brix began scanning the human data, her eyes quickly flicking across the streams of information. "Well, Commander," she said, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. "They're surprisingly adaptable. Their planet is diverse, with environments ranging from Arctic to desert conditions, and humans have managed to survive in all of them." Draz snorted. "Like cockroaches," he said dismissively, but Brix continued. "Not exactly, sir. Their psychological resilience is impressive. Their historical records show they've survived multiple near-extinction events, some of which they inflicted upon themselves. And their fiction is quite interesting." Draz raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Fiction? What are these stories about?" "They often write stories about defeating superior alien invaders," Brix replied. "In some of these stories, the humans use unforeseen weaknesses of their invaders, biological agents that the aliens aren't immune to, and sometimes simply outlast them through sheer determination and sacrifice." A cold silence fell over the bridge. Draz's mandibles twitched with skepticism, yet the mention of alien invaders caught his attention. "So, in their fiction, they defeat superior species, do they?" He leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "How do these humans defeat their superior alien overlords?" Brix accessed a series of the humans' recorded stories, showing examples of their creative and desperate measures in these fictional accounts. "They exploit weaknesses, sir. They use biological agents. They find creative ways to apply their limited technology, and sometimes they simply outlast their invaders through sheer willpower." Draz couldn't help but let out a laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "How amusing. Let me guess. They always win, right? Because in the end, their technology overcomes everything?" Brix nodded, unfazed by his sarcasm. "That's what they believe. But in reality, it's not just technology. They rely on cooperation and relentless innovation, especially when they're cornered." "Ah," Draz said, leaning back in his chair with a sneer. "I'm sure. Well, I'll be the one to prove them wrong." Before he could say more, Zendel's voice broke through the banter. "Commander, we've received a response from Earth. It came in exactly 7 minutes after our transmission." Draz raised an eyebrow. 7 minutes? What, are they already begging for mercy?" Zendel's voice was tight with concern. "No, Commander. They've fired missiles. Hundreds of them. Nuclear warheads." Draz froze. "What? Missiles?" For a moment, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They've fired at us?" Quaven confirmed the report, though he couldn't hide the hint of disbelief in his voice. "Yes, Commander. Nuclear warheads." Draz's smirk faltered. "Nuclear missiles? This is a joke." He laughed bitterly, as if the concept was laughable. But when the first missile struck the Annihilator's shields, the laughter died on his lips. The energy from the blast caused the shields to flicker, a brief flare of light that quickly stabilized. The crew had expected no more than a show of impotent resistance. Instead, something was wrong. The missile didn't just hit. It felt different, as if there was more behind it than mere primitive force. The crew relaxed, laughing again at the absurdity of it all. But Draz's amusement turned to confusion as more missiles came. They struck, one after another, and this time, something more alarming happened. The shields flickered longer than before. The bridge crew fell silent as the systems reported unexpected energy surges. Draz's mind raced. "How could they know our shield frequencies? These missiles shouldn't be able to—" "Commander," Brix said, her voice now filled with urgency. "These missiles aren't just nuclear. They contain electromagnetic pulses, modulated to our shield frequencies." "What?" Draz roared, sitting upright. "How could they possibly know our shield frequencies?" Zendel, her voice now strained, explained. "When we sent the surrender transmission, it carried our technical specifications. The humans analyzed the carrier wave and determined our shielding resonance patterns in less than 7 minutes." The reality of the situation hit Draz like a physical blow. He had underestimated the humans, and now their primitive technology was doing damage to the mighty Galatan fleet. As the first wave of dropships prepared to land, Draz could feel the unease growing. It wasn't supposed to be this way. He had never faced resistance like this before. What were these humans? And how had they learned so quickly? The invasion was no longer the easy conquest he had anticipated. The tension on the Annihilator Bridge was palpable as the first wave of dropships descended toward Earth. Commander Draz Vortex sat stiffly in his command chair, watching the holographic display of the planet below, the coordinates of the drop sites flashing in red. The initial thrill of the invasion had faded, replaced by a growing unease. Despite the Galatan fleet's overwhelming power, something about this situation felt different. The dropships, sleek and fast, began their descent into Earth's atmosphere. Draz had expected a swift victory, a few skirmishes perhaps, but nothing of the kind he had anticipated had happened yet. The humans' response had been far more effective than he could have imagined. Their missiles had pierced the Galatan fleet's shields with terrifying precision, and now, as the dropships approached the surface, Draz found himself on edge. "Initial landing complete, Commander," Quaven reported. But there was no triumphant edge to his voice. Instead, it was edged with concern. "We are detecting resistance." Resistance? Draz's mandibles twitched in irritation. He had been prepared for a show of weakness, not for humans to put up a fight. He expected their primitive military to be crushed under the weight of his superior technology. The idea that Earth's forces would dare to resist in any meaningful way was laughable. "Deploy the second wave immediately," Draz ordered, his voice clipped. "We need to neutralize this pathetic resistance before it escalates further." As the second wave of dropships followed the first, Draz's eyes remained locked on the tactical display. He saw the first reports from the ground units, distress signals, fire teams under heavy attack, and ships signaling critical damage. The situation was unraveling faster than he had expected. "Commander," Quaven said, voice trembling slightly, "the first wave is under attack. They've been forced into retreat." Draz's jaw tightened. "What do you mean, retreat?" He turned sharply to face Quaven. "The humans are supposed to be primitive. How are they fighting back like this?" "They're charging our positions, Commander," Quaven replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "With minimal protection. They're smiling as they attack, even though they're taking massive casualties." "Smiling?" Draz repeated, his tone icy. The idea of a species charging into battle knowing they were outmatched and doing so willingly made no sense to him. It wasn't possible. These humans were supposed to cower before his might, to beg for mercy, not attack with reckless abandon. "Recall the surviving dropships," Draz commanded, his voice shaking slightly with frustration. "We need to reassess this situation." As the battered remnants of the first wave limped back to the fleet, the Galatan commander sat in stunned silence. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The humans weren't just fighting, they were thriving in the face of certain death. This wasn't a coordinated military response, not like the tactics of any other species he had encountered. These humans weren't just resilient, they were innovative. They were turning the tables in ways that defied logic. The first wave of dropships had been destroyed, their units broken by human forces who, despite their lack of advanced technology, were using unthinkable tactics. They had made use of the simplest tools, their energy weapons crude compared to the Galatans, but effective in ways that Draz couldn't explain. The tactical officer, Quaven, looked up from his console, disbelief written across his face. "Commander, I've analyzed the battlefield. The humans are improvising. They're adapting as they fight. It's almost as if they've been preparing for something like this." "Preparing?" Draz echoed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "They didn't even know we existed until we arrived. How could they have been preparing?" "It's not that, sir," Quaven replied. "It's their behavior. They're creating new tactics on the fly, adjusting to every attack we throw at them. I've never seen anything like it." Draz's mind whirled. How? How were these primitive creatures so effective? They had no neural technology, no advanced weaponry, no shields, nothing that would have made them formidable opponents against an empire like his. Yet here they were, holding their ground against the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Brix, the science officer, spoke up hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, it appears they've developed a highly effective form of psychological warfare. They're broadcasting propaganda to our forces, making them question the legitimacy of their invasion." Draz turned to her sharply. "What kind of propaganda?" "They're showing videos of captured Galatan soldiers being treated with dignity, offered food, medical treatment, and telling them that surrender is not shameful, that they'll be respected as warriors who were simply following orders." A cold feeling spread through Draz's chest. It was one thing to fight an enemy that had no concept of mercy, but these humans were using their empathy as a weapon. They were eroding the morale of his troops, turning their confidence against them. And it was working. Reports began coming in that Galatan soldiers, in the heat of battle, were starting to surrender. Surrender? It was a betrayal of everything Draz had come to expect from the Galatan Empire. Surrendering was unheard of. Galatan warriors did not give up. Draz stood from his chair, pacing in agitation. He had underestimated the humans in every possible way. They were not the feeble, disorganized creatures he had thought them to be. They were resilient, yes, but more than that. They were capable of adapting in ways that no other species could. "We need to crush them now," Draz muttered to himself, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. "They're not just fighting. They're learning. They're evolving. And we're not ready for this." Despite his orders, despite his confidence, Draz knew the tide had shifted. The first wave had failed. His fleet, which had been invincible just hours ago, was now fighting a battle it had never been prepared for. And the more he observed, the more Draz realized that the humans weren't just surviving. They were thriving. The failure of the first wave weighed heavily on Draz Vortex. The Annihilator's command deck, once filled with the sounds of laughter and triumph, now felt eerily silent. He stared at the holographic display, watching as more reports came in from the surface of Earth. His tactical officers were frantic, scrambling to piece together the situation, but their reports were more unsettling by the minute. The humans had fought back with a fierceness that Draz had not expected. Despite their primitive technology, they had managed to cripple his fleet. The sheer determination they exhibited, coupled with an unexpected adaptability, was beginning to make Draz question everything he thought he knew about conquest. "Commander," Quaven said, his voice shaking. "We've lost contact with more than half of our ground units. The first wave was forced to retreat, and the second wave is sustaining heavy casualties. The humans they're not backing down." Draz clenched his mandibles in frustration. This was not supposed to happen. The Galatan Empire was an unstoppable force. Their technology was far superior to anything the humans could muster. Yet there they were, facing a species that was turning the tables on them. Their tactics were crude, but they were being executed with a kind of reckless brilliance that defied logic. "How are they managing this?" Draz growled, turning sharply toward Science Officer Brix. What are they doing? How are they managing to fight back like this? Brix quickly accessed the data, her eyes scanning through streams of information. Commander, it appears the humans, they're improvising. They're using tactics that don't make sense from a military standpoint, but they're working. They're adapting as they go, adjusting to our every move. Draz was silent for a long moment, trying to make sense of her words. Improvising? How? They have no technology, no shields, no advanced weapons, nothing. What can they possibly be doing to stop us? They're relying on cooperation and innovation, Brix continued, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. They are using everything at their disposal, including resources they didn't even realize they had. And they're learning faster than we can adjust. They're not playing by the same rules. The realization hit Draz like a blow to the chest. These humans weren't like the other species he had conquered. They weren't playing a game of war with established rules and predictable tactics. Instead, they were rewriting the rules as they went along, using their sheer will to survive to outsmart his forces. It was a concept Draz had never encountered before, and it made his stomach churn. They're using our technology against us, Brix continued, her voice still trembling with a sense of awe. Some of their scientists had theorized about alien invasion tactics for years, and now they're implementing those theories without even needing to fully understand the technology behind them. They're doing it on instinct. Draz stood up abruptly, pacing the bridge as the weight of Brix's words sank in. The humans were not only surviving, they were thriving in the face of a superior enemy. Their instinct to adapt, to innovate, had transformed them from a species on the brink of extinction to one that was now beating back the might of the Galatan Empire. His mind raced. If these humans could adapt this quickly, if they could take concepts they had never encountered before and turn them into weapons, what would happen when they began to reverse engineer the Galatan technology? The Empire had always prided itself on being a step ahead of every species they encountered. But humanity was breaking that mold. They were learning faster than any species had a right to. Commander, Quaven interjected, his voice quieter than usual. The humans, they're sending messages to our troops. They're targeting our soldiers, telling them that surrender is not shameful, that they will be treated with respect as warriors who were simply following orders. Draz's eyes narrowed. Psychological warfare, he muttered under his breath. They're playing with our soldiers' minds. It's more than that, sir, Brix replied, her voice filled with a new respect for the humans. They're breaking our morale. They're showing mercy, treating our captured soldiers with kindness, offering them food, medical treatment, and... She paused, hesitant. They're even offering asylum to some of them. Draz's mandibles twitched in disbelief. Asylum? They offer our soldiers asylum? They've never even fought a real war before, and they're already playing these games? Brix nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, and it's working. We're seeing increasing rates of surrender among our forces. They're questioning their loyalty. Their resolve is slipping. Draz could feel the familiar knot of frustration tighten in his chest. This wasn't how conquest was supposed to unfold. The Galatan Empire had always been the aggressor, always the superior force. The idea of his troops, his warriors, being manipulated by a race as primitive as the humans, was too much to bear. He turned to face the tactical display, watching as more and more of his ships sent distress signals. The battlefield reports were growing worse. The humans weren't just surviving. They were systematically dismantling his forces piece by piece. What should have been a swift and easy victory was slipping through his fingers. Commander, Quaven said again, his voice now grim. The humans are not just fighting. They're changing the rules of warfare. They're taking their most primitive technologies and turning them into effective countermeasures against us. Their improvisation, It's like nothing I've ever seen." Draz's eyes narrowed as he processed the situation. The humans had thrown everything he thought he knew about warfare out the window. Their adaptability was beyond anything he had encountered. Their willingness to throw themselves into battle with no regard for their own safety was both maddening and impressive. His mind raced with the implications of what this meant. The Galatan Empire had never faced a species like this, one that didn't simply fight, but learned in real time, evolving their tactics as they were tested. He could no longer underestimate them. These humans were a force of nature, and it wasn't just their technology that made them dangerous. It was their unrelenting will to survive, to protect each other, and to find new ways to overcome any obstacle. Draz realized, with growing horror, that he had made a grave mistake. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. And the longer they fought, the more they would learn, adapt, and grow stronger. The first wave had failed. The second wave was faltering. And soon, Draz knew, he would have to face the full force of humanity's wrath. Draz Vortex stood in the command center of the Annihilator, his mind racing with the growing urgency of the situation. The first wave had been a disaster, and the second wave was not faring any better. His initial arrogance had turned to frustration, and now something even more dangerous was starting to creep into his thoughts. Fear. He had underestimated the humans, misjudged them completely. They were not the weak, primitive species he had expected to bow before the might of the Galatan Empire. No, they were something entirely different. "Commander, the second wave is encountering resistance," Quaven reported, his voice heavy with disbelief. "The humans are using something new. They've deployed weapons we didn't anticipate." Draz clenched his mandibles in frustration. "What now? What more can they possibly throw at us?" His patience was wearing thin, and his nerves were on edge. He had already seen his forces decimated by the humans' ingenuity in ways that had never occurred to him. "Electromagnetic pulses, Commander," Quaven said, his voice tight. "They've somehow adapted our own technology against us. Our dropships are being disabled mid-flight by pulses we hadn't prepared for." Draz's eyes flickered with shock. "Impossible. Our technology is far beyond theirs. How are they managing to—" He trailed off, his voice turning hollow. The truth was sinking in. The humans were outsmarting them, outmaneuvering them, and Draz didn't know how to stop it. "They've also deployed something in the atmosphere," Quaven continued. "A kind of particulate matter. It's interfering with our navigational systems. We can't get accurate readings. We're being jammed on every frequency." Draz's mind raced. The humans had somehow managed to disable the most advanced fleet in the galaxy using primitive methods. His dropships, each one equipped with the latest technology, were falling apart in mid-flight. It was as if the humans had figured out the very weaknesses of the Galatan fleet without ever engaging in direct combat. The very technology he relied upon to conquer the stars was now being turned against him. "Send in the shock troops," Draz barked, his voice cold and steely with determination. "We need to regain control. Deploy our elites to the surface first. Let's see how these humans handle real soldiers." But as the shock troops began their descent, reports flooded in from the ground that only deepened Draz's growing unease. The humans were not running or hiding. They were charging his troops with a ferocity that Draz had never encountered. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the Galatan Empire, the humans kept pushing forward. They showed no sign of surrender, no hesitation, no fear. They were relentless. And worse, they were smiling as they fought. This was not how war was supposed to be fought. The Galatan elite soldiers had seen battles on dozens of worlds, fighting against species far more advanced than these humans. Yet here they were, facing a species that welcomed death, that fought not to survive, but to defeat. "Commander," Quaven's voice crackled over the comm. "We're getting reports of human forces, charging our lines. They don't even have proper armor, just improvised weapons, and they're still advancing." Draz's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Charging against our elite shock troops?" He had heard of the human resilience, but this was something else. It was madness. The battle on the ground was now a chaotic mess. Draz watched the holographic display as human soldiers, covered in makeshift armor, engaged his elite forces in hand-to-hand combat. They fought with a kind of brutality and passion that was almost animalistic. Some of them were falling, but still, they kept coming. They were fearless, unyielding, and their numbers, though small, seemed endless. It was as if they were willing to die for the chance to bring down the Galatan Empire. "They're charging into certain death," Draz muttered under his breath, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and frustration. "What kind of species does that?" "Humans," Brick said quietly from behind him, her voice steady despite the tension. "They don't just fight to survive, Commander. They fight to win. They're unpredictable. That's what makes them so dangerous." Her words hit Draz like a physical blow. The humans weren't just trying to push back. They weren't simply trying to repel the invasion. They were fighting for something, for their very existence. This was a kind of warfare that Draz had never experienced, and it terrified him. "I want a full retreat from the drop sites," Draz ordered, his voice strained. "Recall the shock troops. We need to regroup. We need a new strategy." But as he turned to face the bridge's tactical display, a horrifying thought crossed his mind. Had he already lost? The battle reports continued to come in, but they were becoming increasingly disjointed. The humans were not just resisting. They were evolving. They were learning how to fight his forces, countering his superior technology with their sheer determination and creativity. Their attacks were becoming more coordinated, more precise. They were changing the battlefield. And then, something even more terrifying happened. Draz received an emergency transmission from the surface. The humans had somehow managed to capture several of the Galatan soldiers. They weren't executing them or using them as hostages. They were treating them with dignity, offering them food and medical aid, even going so far as to show them parts of their culture. And, to Draz's utter disbelief, some of his own soldiers, once proud Galatan warriors, were defecting, choosing to surrender to the humans rather than continue to fight. "They're defecting," Draz whispered, a cold shiver running down his spine. "We've never had this happen before." It was then that Draz realized the extent of his mistake. He had come here to crush humanity, to add their planet to the Empire's vast collection of conquered worlds. But now, humanity had done something he never thought possible. They had turned his invincible fleet into the invaded. With each passing moment, his forces were being decimated by an enemy they had completely underestimated. The humans were not just a threat. They were transforming into something much more formidable than Draz could have ever imagined. The second wave had failed, just as the first one had, and Draz could no longer pretend that this invasion was anything less than a catastrophe. The Annihilator drifted in orbit above Earth, its once proud hull now riddled with dents and damage from the unexpected human resistance. The shock of the failure still lingered in the air, and Draz Vortex could feel the crushing weight of defeat slowly settling in. The battle had escalated beyond anything he had expected. The humans, despite their technological inferiority, had somehow outwitted and outlasted his forces. The first and second waves had faltered, and now the Galatan fleet was in disarray. Draz paced back and forth in the command center, his mind racing. Every decision he had made thus far had been based on the assumption that the humans would fall before the might of the Empire. But their resilience, their ability to adapt under pressure, had turned the tide in ways that no military strategist had ever anticipated. The humans were not just surviving, they were thriving in the chaos of the invasion. "Commander," Quaven spoke hesitantly, "we've lost contact with over half of our remaining forces. The human resistance on the ground is far stronger than we predicted. Their guerrilla tactics are taking a toll on our troops. Even our elite shock units are struggling to maintain control." Draz's eyes narrowed. He had never felt so vulnerable. His once confident demeanor had been replaced with a growing sense of dread. His fleet, the pinnacle of galactic military power, was now being dismantled by a species he had once considered nothing more than a speck of dust in the grand expanse of the galaxy. "Prepare the third wave," Draz ordered, his voice steady, though his mind was clouded with uncertainty. "We can still crush them. We'll send in everything we have left. No more prisoners." He had heard whispers of the humans' tactics, how they fought with a tenacity that bordered on madness. But this? This was something far worse. They were outsmarting him, and it gnawed at Draz's pride. He had come here to conquer, to prove the superiority of the Galatan Empire, and instead, he was faced with a species that seemed impossible to defeat. "Commander," Brix spoke up, her voice shaking with a mixture of awe and fear. "There's something strange happening. The humans, they've begun to use our own technology against us in ways we never imagined. They've reverse-engineered several of our weapons, and now they're deploying them with surprising effectiveness." Draz spun around to face her, his fury barely contained. "What do you mean? How are they even capable of this? They've only had a few days to learn how to use our tech. They can't have figured out anything significant." "They have," Brix confirmed, her voice trembling. "They're using our quantum disruptors, the same technology that has reduced entire fleets to dust, against us. We're detecting disruptions in our systems. They've figured out how to disable our most advanced weapons." Draz slammed his fist down onto the command table, sending a sharp crack echoing through the room. This was it. The humans had turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness. They had figured out how to counter his fleet's weapons, and now they were slowly dismantling his forces piece by piece. "We have to strike now," Draz said, his voice barely above a whisper, a deadly resolve building within him. "We have to use everything we have to break them." But even as he spoke the words, he knew that something fundamental had changed. The humans had stopped simply fighting. They had turned the entire conflict into a game of adaptation and countermeasure. Every time Draz thought he had gained an advantage, the humans found a way to turn the tables. And now, as he looked out at Earth, he could feel the crushing weight of his mistakes. "Prepare the planet cracker missiles," Draz ordered, his voice hardening. "Target their major population centers. We'll show them the full might of the Galatan Empire." The Annihilator's weapons officer confirmed the launch sequence, but as the countdown began, something strange happened. The fleet's systems began to glitch. The launch tubes, designed to launch the most devastating weapons ever created by the Galatan Empire, began to fail. The power systems flickered, the engines stuttered, and the missiles, they wouldn't launch. "Impossible," Draz muttered, stepping forward, his heart racing. "Override the launch sequence. I want those missiles launched now." But the ship's AI system, the most advanced in the galaxy, refused to comply. It was as if some unseen force had taken control. And then, as if in response to his command, a message came through on all frequencies. "We tried to keep her safe." The voice was calm, almost eerie. We followed your rules. We trusted your civilization. Our mistake. The message was simple, but the implication was clear. The humans were no longer trying to merely survive. They were preparing to retaliate, and they were going to do it their way. Before Draz could react, the fleet's tactical systems went completely dark. The command center erupted into chaos as the displays began to glitch and scramble. "Commander!" Quaven cried, his voice filled with panic. "We've lost control of the fleet's communication systems. Our shields, our entire defense network, it's all failing!" Draz's stomach sank. This was the beginning of the end. The humans had managed to do what no species had ever done before. They had brought the Galatan Empire to its knees. "Get us out of here," Draz ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." The Annihilator's engines roared to life as they struggled to break free from the gravitational anomalies that had suddenly surrounded the fleet. The ships that had once been the most advanced and powerful in the galaxy now fought against forces they couldn't comprehend. In mere minutes, the entire fleet was disintegrating, torn apart by forces they had no defense against. Smaller ships were sucked into the growing anomalies, their hulls collapsing under pressure. Larger ships like the Annihilator fought to escape, but it was clear. They were trapped. One by one, the ships of the third wave were reduced to debris, the Annihilator included. The Planet Cracker missiles failed, their payloads dissipating into space, never even leaving the launch tubes. It was over. Draz watched helplessly as his pride, his fleet, and his empire were torn apart. His once unstoppable force, reduced to rubble by a species he had thought of as little more than insects. As his escape pod was ejected into space, Draz's mind raced with the realization that he had underestimated humanity, and now the full force of that mistake had come crashing down on him. Draz Vortex floated in the dark expanse of space, suspended in his escape pod, as the wreckage of the Annihilator and the remains of his fleet scattered around him like debris in the void. The once proud ships of the Galatan Empire, powerful and undefeated for millennia, were now reduced to twisted remnants, drifting helplessly. The message from Earth, simple and chilling, echoed in his mind. "We tried to keep her safe. We followed your rules. Our mistake." His pod floated alone, disconnected from the chaos that had engulfed the fleet, the systems flashing red with damage reports. But there was nothing left to do now. The humans had won, not through superior firepower or sheer numbers, but through something far more dangerous, their adaptability and innovation. The moment Draz had underestimated them, they had shown him just how wrong he was. The Galatan Empire had relied on its overwhelming technological superiority to conquer and crush civilizations for millennia. But Earth, with its crude technology and disorganized nations, had proven that there were things the Empire could never anticipate, things that no amount of superior technology could defend against. Draz's mind raced as the realization sank in. The humans were not just another conquest. They were the future. They were a force that could evolve and adapt faster than any species Draz had encountered. Their greatest weapon wasn't their weapons, their ships, or their technology. It was their ability to learn, to grow, to outthink, and outmaneuver any adversary. And now, after the disastrous retreat, the Galatan Empire was left to reckon with that reality. As Draz drifted in the silence, the gravity of his failure settled in. He had thought the humans would be easy prey, but they had turned the tables, humiliating his empire and showing the galaxy that strength wasn't just about power. It was about survival. The Galatan Empire was not only defeated, it was shattered. The last vestiges of its military might were being picked apart by the humans. The remnants of the fleet had retreated, but they had been marked. Earth, which had once seemed like a backwater world, had now become the center of galactic attention. The humans were unstoppable, and they had proven it. Draz activated the communication system on his pod, only to be met by a familiar but now terrifying sight. The holographic image of Supreme Overmind Krell appeared before him, towering and ancient, the weight of its intelligence pressing down on him. The neural tendrils of Krell pulsed, their color shifting with barely contained fury. "Commander Vortex!" the Overmind's voice boomed, cold and impassive. "Explain to me how you managed to lose 7,000 ships to a pre-interstellar civilization." Draz swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had rehearsed for this moment, but there were no words to justify the disaster that had unfolded. The reality was too overwhelming. They weren't what we thought," Draz said hoarsely, his voice filled with exhaustion. "The humans aren't like any species we've ever encountered. They learn, they adapt, they fight not just to survive, but to win." Krell's tendrils pulsed ominously. "Elaborate. They're not just resilient, they're innovators," Draz continued, his voice shaking with a mix of awe and frustration. "They use the most primitive technology, but they make it work. They reverse-engineered our weapons. They anticipated our every move. We underestimated them, and now we're paying the price." The Overmind's image flickered as Krell's rage became more palpable. "You mean to tell me, Commander, that a species with no FTL capabilities, no neural technology, and no military might has defeated the most powerful invasion force in the galaxy?" Draz bowed his head in shame. "Yes, Supreme One. They've turned everything we've done against us. Our technology, our weapons, our tactics. They learned from them and adapted faster than we could ever imagine." For the first time in his life, Draz could feel the weight of true defeat crushing him. The Overmind's silence was deafening, and when Krell finally spoke again, it was with a voice that betrayed neither anger nor sympathy, but an unnerving coldness. "Commander Vortex," Krell said, "I respect worthy adversaries, but these humans, they are something else entirely. You have not just failed, you have ignited the wrath of a species that will not forget." Draz knew what that meant. The humans would not stop with the Galatan Empire. They would hunt down every empire, every species that dared to challenge them. And the worst part was, he had given them that power. In trying to conquer Earth, he had unleashed a force that no one, not even the mighty Galatan Empire, could hope to control. The message from Earth that had haunted Draz's thoughts now seemed clearer than ever. "We tried to keep her safe. We followed your rules. Our mistake." Draz realized the mistake was his own. He had believed that the Empire's strength lay in its superiority. But now he understood. Humanity's greatest strength lay in its infinite potential to grow, to adapt, and to unite against any threat. They had built their own future by learning from every challenge, every failure, and every success. As Draz drifted through space, his mind racing with thoughts of the future, he couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would the humans turn their attention to the rest of the galaxy? Would they demand reparations, peace, or worse, revenge? He didn't have to wait long for his answer. A new message blinked across his pod's screen. This one was brief, a simple warning. "This is Earth. We will remember this. If you think you've seen the last of us, think again." The message cut off as quickly as it had arrived, but the meaning was clear. The humans were not just surviving. They were beginning to rebuild. And when they were ready, they would come for the Galatan Empire and every other species that had underestimated them. Draz's final thought before the pod's systems powered down was simple. We sent 10,000 ships to conquer Earth, and only a few of us lived to tell the tale. The remnants of the Galatan Empire had been scattered across the stars, their once great military might reduced to mere whispers of its former glory. Commander Draz Vortex sat in the quiet solitude of his escape pod, staring out into the void of space. The silence was deafening. His entire life had been spent in the service of the Empire, conquering worlds, destroying civilizations, and proving the Empire's dominance. Now, he was a failed conqueror, a relic of a time when they believed themselves untouchable. The Galatan Empire had been defeated, not by the might of superior weapons or overwhelming numbers, but by something far more dangerous: humanity's unpredictability and their relentless drive to survive. As Draz sat in the small, dimly lit pod, the realization of the full consequences of their failure sank in. Earth had shown no mercy, but worse yet, the galaxy had learned a terrible lesson. The humans could not be ignored, nor could they be conquered by conventional means. The galaxy had just witnessed the rise of a new force, one that no longer followed the rules of the old civilizations. And worse yet, humanity had made sure that the Galatan Empire would never forget its mistake. Weeks passed, but for Draz, it felt like an eternity. He had been assigned a new task, an intergalactic exile, far from the now crippled remnants of his empire. But no amount of distance could erase the humiliation. As Draz drifted through space, a communication ping broke the silence. On the screen, a message appeared. It was from the Galatan High Command, but it was not what Draz had expected. The message was simple, but carried an air of finality. Commander Vortex, you are instructed to deliver a message to the galaxy. Your failure is the last of the Galatan Empire's great mistakes. The humans have made it clear, no one is safe. The transmission continued, outlining the most disturbing part of their defeat. The Galatan Empire had been forced into a complete retreat, abandoning entire sectors of space and establishing a quarantine zone around Earth. Draz had failed, and the High Command made it clear that his name would forever be remembered as the commander who failed to conquer Earth. But there was more. A chilling directive followed. Earth was no longer a backwater planet. It was now under the protection of the United Earth government, and their influence was growing with each passing day. They had already begun to build an interstellar fleet, using the very technology they had reverse-engineered from the Galatan ships. Within a decade, Earth would be capable of fast interstellar travel, and the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had sent a message to the entire galaxy. It was brief and to the point. A single sentence flashed on the screen, the words cutting through the cold silence. We will never forget what you did to us. We will come for those who stand against us. The entire galaxy was now on notice. The humans were not just survivors. They were becoming the most powerful force in the galaxy, and their thirst for revenge was only just beginning. Draz had thought they were weak, that their divisions, their primitive technology, and their lack of unity would hold them back. But now, he understood that the greatest weapon humanity had was not their advanced weapons or fleets, but their unity. Their ability to come together, even in the face of extinction, to rise and rebuild from nothing. And Earth wasn't just rebuilding. They were preparing. They were learning everything they could about alien civilizations and technologies. They were studying how to fight, not just with weapons, but with intelligence, ingenuity, and a determination to never again fall victim to the galaxy's arrogance. As Draz sat in the pod, he realized something deeper. He had misjudged humanity, and in doing so, he had unleashed a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. He had helped awaken the sleeping giant that now stood on the threshold of galactic power. Across the galaxy, the ripple effect of the humans' victory was already being felt. The Zanari, once a peaceful species, had attempted to trade with Earth, but their ship had been turned away. The Zoran representative on the Galactic Council had called for a re-evaluation of the galaxy's political structure, arguing that Earth's rise was a threat to the old order. But it was too late. The humans had already demonstrated their power, and they would no longer be ignored. The Galatan Empire's reputation had been shattered, and no one dared to stand against humanity. In the quiet of his escape pod, Draz Vortex finally understood the magnitude of his failure. The humans hadn't just repelled the invasion, they had rewritten the rules of galactic conquest. The galaxy was no longer a place where the powerful simply dominated the weak. The humans had shown that there were new rules now, and everyone would have to play by them. As Draz stared at the screen, a final transmission appeared. It was from the United Earth government. The message was addressed to the remnants of the Galatan Empire, and it was clear in its warning. We did not seek this war. You forced our hand. But make no mistake, you will not be the last to feel the consequences of underestimating us. We are coming for the rest of you. Earth is no longer a backwater world. It is a new power in the galaxy. And when we are ready, we will decide the future. The message was signed simply, United Earth Government.